If you ever want proof that stubbornness can beat common sense, look no further than Venice, a city that looks like someone dared geography to say no and then built an empire just to prove a point. Floating on water, glimmering like a hallucination, Venice shouldn't exist. And yet for 1,500 years, it has not only existed but done so with style. But it didn't begin as a masterpiece. Oh no. It began as a swamp so miserable even mosquitoes packed up early. Back in ancient Roman times, the Venetian lagoon was a gray, marshy wasteland, endless mud, saltwater puddles, and reeds taller than your dignity. The air buzzed with humidity and despair. The Romans, who were known for building aqueducts across mountains, took one look and said, "No thanks." Still, being Romans, they couldn't resist poking at it. They built a few docks and fishing posts along the edges, probably because there's no landscape they wouldn't try to tax. But they knew this wasn't the place for marble monuments. You can't build a Colosseum when the ground jiggles like pudding. So they left it mostly alone, a soggy void at the edge of civilization. For centuries, the lagoon sat ignored, half land, half water, all damp. Then came the 5th century. The Roman Empire, once the pride of the world, collapsed like a marble building that forgot about gravity. Barbarians poured into Italy, Goths, Huns, Vandals, all the classics. They burned cities, looted temples, and left behind ash and panic. The survivors of those cities looked for safety anywhere they could find it. That's when someone pointed toward the lagoon and said, "Nobody would ever follow us in there." And just like that, the world's strangest city was born. The first Venetians weren't architects or dreamers. They were survivors, tired, muddy, and possibly regretting their choices. Refugees from cities like Padua and Aquileia waded into the lagoon, dragging what little they could carry. They built huts on stilts, tied boats to their doors, and promised themselves it was temporary. Spoiler, it wasn't. Life in early Venice was less romantic gondola ride and more permanent camping trip in ankle-deep water. There was no farmland, no solid ground, and definitely no plan. Every day was a battle against the tide. If the water rose, your living room became a small lake. If the wind blew, your house creaked like a haunted ship. The locals fished, collected salt, and complained, but they survived. And that's the thing. Venice wasn't built on ambition, it was built on stubbornness. These were people who looked at the mud and said, "Fine, we'll make it work." They began hammering wooden poles, oak, alder, and larch, deep into the lagoon bed, thousands of them. Each pole was a tiny act of defiance, a promise that maybe the city wouldn't sink before dinner. They jammed the logs close together until the swamp turned into a forest you couldn't walk through. On top of that, they laid wooden planks, then stone. Slowly, the soggy ground became solid, or at least solid enough to build on without drowning immediately. The early Venetians didn't know it, but they were performing one of history's greatest engineering magic tricks. Those waterlogged piles, preserved by oxygen-poor water, would one day hold up an empire. Still, it wasn't glamorous. The city smelled like fish and damp wood. But somehow they stayed. Year after year they kept hammering, building, and adjusting, and through sheer persistence, Venice began to rise. By the 6th century, Venice had gone from temporary refugee camp to accidental civilization. It was official. They were staying, which raised a new question. How do you build a city on liquid mud without everything collapsing like wet bread? The answer, millions of wooden piles. Venetians didn't do things halfway. They hammered piles by hand day and night until the lagoon floor became a wooden carpet. Then they covered it with planks and topped it with slabs of limestone hauled from across the Adriatic. This Istrian stone was so tough it practically sneered at salt water. Every building, every church, every palazzo you see today still stands on those ancient wooden foundations. That is the secret of Venice. It is not floating. It is resting on a petrified forest, hidden beneath the waves. The wood, deprived of oxygen, never rots. It hardens, mineralizes, and becomes stone over centuries. It's ironic, really. The world's most elegant city stands on dead trees and denial. Once they figured out how to keep the ground from disappearing, the Venetians got bold. They built bridges between islands, creating the first watery streets. They organized trade routes and learned to live with the tides instead of fighting them. And somehow this soggy, improbable settlement began to thrive. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate the logistics. Every single thing Venice needed, food, bricks, metal, livestock, had to come by boat. No roads, no horses, no wagons, just oars, sails, and optimism. You didn't just build a city on water, you built a civilization that ran entirely on boats. Need to deliver wood? Boat. Want to visit your neighbor? Boat. Want to go to church, buy groceries, or fight off pirates? Boat, boat, boat. It was urban planning in slow motion, yet somehow it worked. Against every law of physics and hydrology, the city didn't sink. It settled gracefully, like an old nobleman refusing to admit he's had too much wine. Venice became a miracle, not of divine intervention, but of logistics and sheer determination. And soon people began to notice. Even after the Roman Empire crumbled, its ghost lingered. The early Venetians, surrounded by ruins, did what any practical survivors would do. They recycled them. They stripped fallen cities for parts. Old Roman bricks, marble columns, and statues were loaded onto barges and ferried into the lagoon. Venice became a collage of other civilizations, a mosaic city built from stolen beauty. It was a Frankenstein's monster of architecture. Roman arches, Byzantine mosaics, and Gothic flair, all stitched together on water. But somehow, it worked again. The Venetians took what the world discarded and made it beautiful. They also borrowed Rome's favorite trick, the arch. Arches became the backbone of Venetian design, strong, graceful, and resistant to the shifting tides. Geometry replaced solid ground. And where most cities built upward, Venice built outward, balancing delicately on its aquatic skeleton. By the 8th century, Venice had grown beyond survival. It was thriving. While the rest of Europe was busy rebuilding after Rome's collapse, Venice became the middleman of the Mediterranean. Trade was its lifeblood. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa. Everything passed through Venice's markets. Its location was perfect, halfway between east and west, protected by the lagoon, yet open to the sea. The Venetians didn't have much land, but they had boats, and those boats became legendary. They built sleek merchant ships and war galleys, fast enough to outrun pirates and large enough to carry empires. Venice turned trade into power, power into influence, and influence into art. Its merchants became nobility, its sailors heroes, its city a golden reflection in the water. Soon, people stopped laughing at the swamp people. The city that shouldn't exist was suddenly richer, grander, and more powerful than almost any on Earth. By the Renaissance, Venice was the envy of Europe. Its skyline glittered with domes and bell towers, each one rising from the lagoon like a dream that refused to wake. Palaces lined the canals, their facades dripping with marble and mosaics. Artists, scholars, and merchants flocked to the city that seemed to float between heaven and sea. But beneath all that beauty, the same old forest of wood and willpower still held it up. Every palace was a miracle of balance. Every bridge was a dare to gravity. And every sunrise over the Grand Canal was proof that a bad idea, handled with genius, can change the world. The Venetians ruled the waves. They built an empire of trade that stretched from the Adriatic to the edges of Asia. They became masters of diplomacy and finance, bankers, explorers, and occasionally pirates with good PR. And yet, through it all, they never forgot what they were. A people born from mud, united by water, kept alive by sheer persistence. Empires came and went, kingdoms rose and fell, but Venice remained, shimmering, stubborn, eternal. Even when the seas rose and the tides threatened, even when Napoleon came and the Austrians followed, the city refused to sink. Its foundations, that impossible forest beneath the waves, held strong. Today, Venice stands as both a warning and a wonder, proof that human imagination can defy nature but never escape it. The canals still whisper with the sound of oars. The marble still glows in the evening light, and somewhere beneath the water, those ancient logs, those first acts of defiance, are still holding firm, turning slowly to stone. Venice was never meant to exist, and that's exactly why it does. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the impossible, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to join us on our next adventure. See you then.